Well, it originally started Evans Scholar selection meeting that was held at Cherry Hills in February of 2010. And John Kaskowski, the CEO of Western Golf Association, who runs and operates the BMW Championship, was meeting with John Ogden and I in the men's grill at Cherry Hills the night before the selection meeting. And frankly, John popped the question, do you think Cherry Hills would ever have an interest in hosting the BMW Championship? And John looked at me and I looked at John. And frankly, we didn't know. And over the course of the next year and a half, we really got to the answer.
The answer, as everyone and his dog now knows, was a resounding yes. 4.5 years later, Cherry Hills would stage Colorado's first PGA Tour event in 8 years. More than 126,000 spectators flocked to the BMW Championship, the penultimate event in the FedEx Cup playoffs. Billy Horschel won it with a 4-round total of 14 under. But the event represented an even greater triumph for fans, Colorado Golf, Cherry Hills, and the event's sole beneficiary, the Chick Evans Caddy Scholarship Program. And the man driving it all was a former Evans Scholar, General Chairman George Solich.
George spoke about the Evans Scholar constantly in the board meetings and the executive committee meetings. You could tell it meant a lot to him. It meant a lot of his upbringing as a young caddy in Colorado Springs. As far as continuing to raise money, George, that was his primary goal, was to raise money for the Evans Scholar Fund.
He was the visionary, the leader, the guy that made it happen. And he made it very clear, the very first meeting, right here at Cherry Hills Country Club, he said, this is going to be the best BMW championship ever. And how we're going to define that is very simple. We're going to raise more money for the Evans Scholar Foundation than ever has been raised in the history of this tournament.
Sure enough, the event would raise $3.5 million for the Evans Scholarships, the most in the event's history.
The one thing that stands out in my mind about working with George was he wanted to make sure the experience was a great experience for every group, especially the caddies. You know, George, obviously being a caddy, growing up being a caddy, receiving the Evans Scholarship, caddying is what he did, it's what we do as a charity, and it was really important to take care of the caddies. And so I can remember many meetings of talking with George and what can we do to make sure that the caddies have the best possible experience.
I think the BMW Championship was the perfect event for George, just for the fact there's so many different entities. Where we host the U.S. Amateurs, just Cherry Hills and the USGA, where this one you had the WGA, who was the host organization, the PGA Tour, the BMW, who's a sponsor of the championship, as well as they're represented by Octagon Sports, who does their marketing, and then Cherry Hills is the host club. You have a lot of different entities, and that's what George was so good about. You needed one individual who could bring all those different entities together, and that was George.
In terms of George's style and his intensity, towards the end of the tournament, we started using a tagline for George that was, George Solich, everything, all the time, because he's just totally involved. His standard is incredibly high, and I think that that's one of the real attributes that George brings, is the ability to elevate everybody's game, because he's constantly pushing for the absolute best.
George's high, exacting standards resulted not only in a windfall for the Evans Scholars, the PGA Tour recognized the BMW Championship as its tournament of the year.
My memory is going in the locker room on the last day and speaking with Ben Crane and him telling me that to a man in the locker room, players, it was, to him and most of the players, it was a top 2 tournament for the whole year. And to a man in the locker room, it was one of the top 5 tournaments of the year.
Will the BMW Championship come back to Cherry Hills Country Club? I know the BMW Championship, the Western Golf Association, would love to be back in Colorado. And it takes a lot of sacrifice from the members of the club, as well it does for George. I mean, from what he did, he sacrificed 3 years of his life, or 4 years of his life, to put this championship on.
I have no doubt that it will be back. You know, I think I certainly would serve as a very positive mentor for somebody, but to carve, 3 years out to do it again, we'll see.
Setting a Western Open BMW Championship record for fundraising was the latest manifestation of George's philanthropic largesse. Over the course of the last few years, he co-founded, with his brother Jeff, the Solich Caddy and Leadership Program at Common Ground Golf Course and founded the Colorado Golf Foundation with a lead gift of $2 million.
I think the reason George has made such a great impact on golf is probably two things: passion and generosity. I've never met anybody more passionate than George Solich. There's a fire burning in him that just is, it's unique. It's a rare thing. You pair that with generosity and an incredible desire to give forward, to pay it forward, as they say, you've got an amazing combination. Caddying is at the epicenter of that passion. The game of golf, and I mean this sincerely, is fortunate to have somebody with that level of charisma, passion, and generosity to make sure the caddy is not forgotten.
The Board of Directors of the Colorado Golf Hall of Fame congratulates George Solich on being its Golf Person of the Year.